Okay, here we have our live coding web drum machine, and we have two panels. On the left we have the code, and the code is a JavaScript function, and that JavaScript function is going to generate a beat B, and that beat corresponds to what we see on the right here, which is the pattern in the step sequencer. So we have two ways of interacting with this. We can either write code directly, or we can directly manipulate the pattern here in the step sequencer. So I'll start by just clicking this step sequencer. And what we see is that some code has been automatically generated. So the code we've generated here is a bit complex, but what it's saying is that basically I just want to create an array of length 16 to have a whole array here, and I'm going to fill it with ones, and then I'm going to cut out everything after the first index, after the 0th index, so from 1 to 15, I'm going to fill that with 0. So this looks kind of like overkill for now. But this will make it easier for us as we continue to add to this pattern. So the next thing that I'm going to add is another beat here. On the third beat of this 16 beat pattern, you can see that the code that we've generated has changed. So the code we've generated now is saying, rather than just returning the constant 1, we're going to return 1 minus the index mod 2. And so that's giving us this pattern here. So let's just run this. We're getting these 2 beats. Now, we're still splicing out everything after the third beat, so let's stop doing that. And we can see how that pattern continues on for the rest, how this pattern generalizes over the rest of the 16-beat pattern. Okay, so the other thing is that we don't have to stick to this. We can take this, we can start changing it. So if we have this, we can say, well, actually, you know what, I want to fill this with ones. Or twos, or whatever we want. So, right, this is, the way this step sequencer works is you have an array, and the values are either 0 for empty, 1 for a medium beat, or 2 for a strong beat. So this is just JavaScript. We can write whatever you want here, as you've seen. Let's see this in action with a different pattern. So here I'm going to start working on a hi-hat pattern. Again, we've just got this 1. If we had a 2, it would look like this. And 0, actually it solves it by saying, okay, well, I can just return the index, which is not so interesting. So let's say I want this pattern that looks like weak, strong, and I think this is going to generalize correctly. So we've got this pattern going on now. Now let's say maybe I want it, but I don't want it for the whole thing, so do something like this. Cool. And so let's add a kick pattern down here. We've got our kick drum just on every 4 beats. And so you can see here that the code it synthesizes actually can get fairly complex when it needs to. This one's generalizing the way we expected. Now what's interesting is that if we can't find a solution, if we add a note in here and it's not able to do synthesis, what it's going to do is its best. So here we have, I've added another beat on second beat, the first index here. And our system is saying, okay, well, I wasn't able to take your change and integrate it into the rest of your existing pattern. Whereas up here, if we were to click here, let's just add this. It says, okay, yeah, I know how to fix that. Now this rhythm 5 is just always 1 for the range that we care about. Let's just go back to what we had before. But in the case that we can't figure this out, it's just going to say, well, I want to make sure that the code on the left here is always in sync with whatever's going on in this pattern that you're directly manipulating. So I'm just going to put a direct array index, and the same thing will happen if we put a value randomly in here. So the other thing that's important to note is that we can we're not limited to just these templates. So all the code that we've generated so far falls into this sort of a nice template of saying, okay, we've got a map of some value that we generate, and then we fill the rest of it with some value. So far we've only seen zeros, but it could be ones or twos as well. But we're not limited to this. This is still, we can write any kind of JavaScript we want. So instead of having a 2 here, we might have a random value. So we could write random like this. And so you can see on every beat, this value gets a new random value. And we could do this anywhere we want. Let's put this here. Now this is not something we could synthesize because it's random, so it's not something our program synthesis could figure out, but we're welcome to write any sort of code we want, as long as it's valid JavaScript and produces these 16 arrays of length 16 with the values 0 to 1. And this is where we're at with our live coding drum machine.